Welcome to today's video lecture. This is a continuation of our motivation portion of this unit. We are still in Unit 4, focusing on modules 4.7b and c, which is going to look at the motivation of eating behavior and the motivation of belongingness.
First, looking at motivation of eating, what motivates us to eat? And we see a picture of a lot of different things, from memory to classical conditioning to glucose to genes, hypothalamus, something called set point, the food around us, metabolism. All these things we're going to talk about impact and motivate us to choose to eat or not eat. So first, looking physiologically, what's happening inside of our body that leads us to eat? First thing we have is something called glucose. Glucose is also called, you might also hear it called blood sugar glucose levels. But glucose is the amount of blood sugar that we have moving throughout our bloodstream. And so what happens is that when our glucose goes low, or when you think about a diabetic whose blood sugar goes low, meaning their glucose or the sugar in their system goes down. What happens when that occurs is that we have an increase in hunger. All of a sudden we have hormones from our stomach to our liver and our intestines all of a sudden signal to the brain, oh my gosh, you need to eat, that glucose level is low. In contrast, when your blood sugar is high, that causes a decrease in hunger. Again, those hormones are not stimulated, so they are not sending those messages through the bloodstream, forcing you to eat. We also look at something called the lateral and ventromedial hypothalamus. So I know that in our neuroscience unit, we talked about the fact that the hypothalamus regulates our hunger, our thirst, and our body temperature. When looking specifically at hunger, the hypothalamus, when certain portions are stimulated, increases how much we eat, and when certain parts of our hypothalamus are stimulated, it actually decreases our hunger. So in order to know the difference between the lateral and ventromedial hypothalamus, I think about lateral, large hunger. Lateral, large hunger. Ventromedial, very minimal hunger. Ventromedial, very minimal hunger. So what I see in lateral is that when you have a low glucose, it's going to stimulate, that hormone is going to stimulate the lateral hypothalamus in order to make you hungry. So what happens if you have damage to that? If the lateral hypothalamus is completely gone or destroyed and no longer are you able to stimulate it, you will find that there will be an individual who won't be able to be hungry anymore because they don't have the portion of their brain that when stimulates causes them to be hungry. In contrast to the ventromedial hypothalamus relates to very minimal hunger. So when you stimulate the ventromedial, that individual gets those signals of fullness. They're no longer hungry. If we were to damage the ventromedial hypothalamus, we would have a person who never experiences that full sensation because that portion of the brain is not able to communicate that you are full and you no longer need to eat. So it is important that you know the difference between the lateral and the ventromedial, what happens when you stimulate it, and what happens if it's destroyed. Another important part of the physiological piece of hunger is our metabolic rate, or also called our metabolism. So our basal metabolic rate is the energy we use or burn when our body is at rest. So individuals who have an easier time losing weight tend to have a higher metabolism, meaning that they burn more energy at rest than others. And those who have a harder time losing weight tend to have a lower basal metabolic rate. Something that's very interesting is that your food intake can impact your basal metabolic rate. That if you decrease your food intake, you can actually lower your metabolic rate. If your body doesn't have enough food in order to run its system, your metabolism is actually going to work lower or slower because your body doesn't have the ability to burn off that energy. There's also a theory called the set point theory, and that's where you see the picture down below where it has a picture of a woman in her set point, and then a new set point, and then a new set point. This theory says that we kind of have a comfortable range in which our body feels at a certain weight. So let's say your set point for an individual is 125 pounds. When an individual starts to gain weight or go above 125 pounds, we find that the body decreases the hunger and increases the metabolism rate in an effort to get you back down to that 125. In contrast to that, when you fall below your set point, we find that the body decreases your metabolism rate and increases your hunger in an effort for your body to get you back to that set point that you are at. And so it's very challenging to lose weight because you need to change your set point. And so it takes a while to be able to change your set point in order to have a new set point. So an individual who is, let's say, 200 pounds and wants their new set point to be 175 pounds, they're going to be fighting hunger. They're going to be fighting a lower metabolic rate as they are losing weight. So it's a constant battle because that body is trying to keep you at that set point when you are trying to change your body's set point. And finally, when we talk about the hunger hormones, specifically when we have a low blood sugar, there is a hormone from the stomach, such as Ghrelin. I'm not quite sure how to say it perfectly. And this hormone is what is sent out in your body that stimulates hunger. How about the psychology of hunger and what else ties into when you eat? One of the things that ties into when you eat is memory. Memory of the last time that you ate, memory of, oh, it's noon, I should probably be hungry for lunch, or oh, it's 6 o'clock and I haven't had dinner yet. Memory plays a role in when you are hungry. They've actually done experiments with amnesic patients where they've given them food every 20 minutes and told them that it was lunchtime, and found that individuals with amnesia would eat in those 20-minute increments because they couldn't remember the last time they ate, and so they assumed when they were being told it was lunchtime that meant they were hungry and they needed to eat. And so that memory of the last time you ate plays a role. Taste preference also plays a role in what you eat. For example, when you are tense or depressed, you tend to crave more starchy foods, carbs, sweets, because those things boost the serotonin in your body, in your brain, and it tends to calm us. So we also find taste preferences, when individuals are feeling good, they don't have that increase in craving like you see when somebody is stressed or depressed. Classical conditioning also plays a role in what we eat when we look at associations and taste aversions, or the research of Garcia, where certain foods have been classically conditioned for you to be sick to. That impacts what you choose to eat. Your culture does. Looking at different cultures, that it's a delicacy to eat horse or dog or cat or rat or animal eyes. Certain cultures have different foods that they eat. Also, you see different cultures with the spices that they use and how often they use spices in their food. That impacts what we eat and how much we eat. And finally, situational eating. We find that individuals eat more when they're with friends or with others. We find that the size of plates and the size of food that's served impacts how much you eat. If a person is given more food, they will then eat more food. If a person is given less food, they will eat less. If the person is given a larger plate, they will eat more than if they're given a smaller plate. We also find amount and variety, so buffets versus individual portions. We find individuals eat more in buffets than they do in an individual portion. So all these things tied together that impact our eating behavior. When we look at obesity, we look at what impacts obesity, what causes obesity, and what impacts it. Some of the impacts of obesity is, obviously the number one is diabetes, a difficulty in regulating your blood glucose levels. Heart disease, an increase with obesity, high blood pressure. In women, they've actually found cognitive declines where they've seen, looked at patients who are, or individuals who are experiencing Alzheimer's at a much earlier rate in females when they are obese. They've also found that there are genes that are related, an obesity gene that they found. When individuals don't sleep as much, we find that hormone that we talked about earlier, that ghrelin, actually rises and is secreted more often in individuals who have sleep loss. We also find individuals get new set points And those new set points, as we talked about earlier, are very challenging to break. Finally, today we're going to talk about what motivates our need to belong. Why do we want to be in groups? And some of the reasons why we belong, or what motivates us to belong, one of the biggest ones is for survival. It's an instinct all the way back from our ancestors. Those that had people around them had somebody to help with protection. They had shared work so they didn't get exhausted. They were able to share food. They were able to reproduce to the next generation. And all those things, those people who had those were the ones that survived. And so belonging was not just because it felt good, but because you needed it to survive and thrive in your society. We've also found that we are motivated to belong because belonging makes us feel happy. There was a study done in 2010 where they looked at university students who had close relationships in compared to university students who did not have close relationships, that's with family or friends. And they found that those who had the close relationship tended to be more happier students than those that didn't have the close relationships. So we seek these bonds in order to experience happiness. I put a little picture up there if you have or have not seen Castaway, a movie about Tom Hanks who ends up on this island all by himself, and he takes a volleyball and he makes it a friend and calls him Wilson. That even when we don't have people around us, we find ways to belong. We find ways to have personal connection with somebody else. Nobody desires to be alone. We also look at Harlow's monkeys, those monkeys that were deprived of social interaction, those monkeys that were deprived of a cloth mother. We found a lot of struggles with them. Also, when we looked at the case of Jeannie during our development unit, Jeannie, who was locked in her room for those 10, 12 years of her life, well, look at what happened to Jeannie. It impacted her cognitive development. It impacted her social development. It impacted her ability to really kind of experience and enjoy life. So the need to belong and having strong relationships really is the foundation of who we are. And our focus in class is going to be, if these are the things that we get when we belong, imagine what happens when we're ostracized. What happens when we don't belong? What happens when we don't have those solid friend groups or family connections? How devastating is that to our survival? And that's what we're going to be focusing on in class. Have a great day.